I want to say thank you for having me today. This is just a gorgeous church, and I've had such a warm welcome, and I appreciate all the people that made it possible for me to be here this morning. And if you're having trouble hearing me, just move on down. It's not Diamond's fault back there. It's that I don't have a loud voice. Unity has a theme for the year 2020. It's perfect vision, seeing through a spiritual lens. And the website wants us to know that 2020 vision is more than just being able to see so many feet away. That perfect vision is more about how we see the world, what we see and what we look for. Each month in the year they will have a theme, and the theme for February is imagination swings wide the gate of possibility. Imagination is one of our powers. I have a couple of quotes from famous people about imagination. George Lucas. You can't do it unless you can imagine it. Muhammad Ali. The man who has no imagination has no wings. Albert Einstein said, I am enough of an artist. You notice he didn't say, I'm enough of a scientist. He said, I'm enough of an artist to draw freely upon my imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. In another place he said, logic will get you from A to Z. Imagination will get you everywhere. I'm going to read a quote to you from our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, from the book Talks on Truth. It is your mission to express all that you can imagine God to be. You can attain to everything that you can imagine. If you imagine that it is possible to God, it is also possible to you. There's something really powerful in that. If you can imagine that it is possible to God, it is also possible for you. Whatever possibility your mind conceives, that is for you to attain. Powerful statements. On the website, and you're welcome to go to Unity Worldwide Ministries and look up the theme and read the article, and it has some other stuff. It has some imagination affirmations, and they're printed for you, and they're in the bulletin, and they are great affirmations. Creating is natural to me. Starting now, I aim to create the future I am dreaming about. I loved this morning, I loved in your service that you have so many affirmations, and that you all say them together. Harvey does a great job of that, of getting you to personalize them and for you to say them. At the first service, one of the little girls was saying this statement of being so well that I wanted to put a mic in front of her. Because, I don't think she could be more than 5 or 6. And she was saying it. She was owning it. I could see that had become her vision. She was imagining that for herself. our ability to imagine, to get a mental picture of something, to see it in our mind's eye, to get the mental equivalent of it, to hold it, to add layers of thought and feeling around it, to put actions around our vision. That brings that vision closer to reality, and we keep doing it, and it comes into manifestation. One of the ways that metaphysicians, the metaphysicians of ministers that are coming out of Unity School now talk about this. They use a little different language than I learned, but they talk about that where we live is in the relative realm, and that the idea, the ideal, the Christ idea, the God idea is the absolute. And so there is an absolute idea of I am health, an absolute idea that there is an abundance of everything needed by everyone in the universe. There is an absolute idea about there being peace on earth, an absolute idea for harmony, for abundance. And the truth is, you and I, we live back over here in relative land. And sometimes our distance from the absolute is just that far. I told this at the first service. In August, I decided I needed to lose weight. And so I got a little app on my phone called Noom. And it asks you to put in there your big plan and your big goal. And my big goal was to lose enough weight and to do enough exercise that if I fell down, that I could get myself up off the ground. In May, I fell down and broke up here in my upper arm. And for the first time, I could not get up. And so I realized you got to do something about that. So here's where I'm living relatively. And way over here is this absolute idea of the health and ability that I should have now, that I am now, that I'm capable of. Now, when I started answering Noom, it asked me what weight I wanted to be, and I put what I weighed when I was 16. I don't know that that's the real absolute weight. In the meantime, I'm way over here in August. That's a long way away. And so what you have to do is you have to start working on the adjacent possibility. This is where I am. Let's see if we can do 5 pounds. I get there. Well, maybe I can do 5 pounds more. Inch by inch. Every time I move a little closer to the absolute, I can then see my way clear. I'm using that example because many times our health relatively are over here and the absolute is way over there. You get a cancer diagnosis and you're over here. And you have to start believing over there. That's work. So you begin believing that you trust your doctor. You begin believing that you have the power to go through the treatment. You begin to believe that you can walk through each day, and as you go each day, you move closer to the absolute. You and I have this invisible power to change our lives. I'm going to share a story about the power of imagination. In the 1400s, sculptors were commissioned to create a series of 12 biblical figures, sculpture, for a cathedral in Florence. It took over 60 years for the first 2 figures to be completed. And there was this giant block of marble that was mined and brought all the way from a quarry in northern Tuscany for this purpose. And it took a great amount of effort, strength, expense to bring that piece of marble. And the artist, Agostino di Duccio, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not, spent 2 years on the project, and he didn't get very far. He was at the feet. And according to Wikipedia, his association with the project ceased. I think he got fired. A year later, Antonio Rossellini was commissioned to take up where his predecessor left off. He didn't get very far either. He got fired too. And so the project was abandoned, and it wasn't abandoned for just a few months or a few years. That huge, giant piece of marble sat out in the yard where all the building materials were for 25 years, until enough stuff was done that it became, kind of like a sore subject sitting out there. And the church authorities decided it was time to find somebody to do something with this block of marble. And so they got consultations from artists to turn that block of marble was then called the Giant. And so many people were consulted on the project, including Leonardo da Vinci. But in August 16th, in 1501, 26-year-old Michelangelo convinced the church authorities to give him the commission. And he soon began to carve the statue. And he worked on the massive biblical hero for 3 years. And in 1504, David was complete. And you and I can still go and see David. Although Michelangelo was an artist with great many capabilities, he considered sculpting to be the highest form of art because he believed that it mimicked divine creation, meaning he worked with the idea, the premise, that David was already in that block of marble and he only had to take away that which was not David. About the block of stone, he said, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free." He used his power of imagination to see David in that marble. And you and I have that same power. Whatever we can imagine, we can create. When you and I get this idea, we can move and manifest. This isn't just theology, it's science. Harvard Medical School neuroscientist Alvaro Pascual Leone taught a group of students a 5-finger piano exercise. And he taught it to them, and then he had the students come in, broke them into 2 groups. And every day, one group came in and practiced the 5-finger, hello? It's always at the bottom of the bag. It's amazing. They practiced that 5-finger exercise, and at the same time, they wired their brains, and they clipped wires to them, and they measured the activity in their motor cortex. And they could see how the motor cortex activity grew. And what happened is that grew until, they could do that exercise without consciously thinking about it because the neural pathways had been formed. The other group, they had come in and they had them sit in chairs just like you're sitting and imagine doing the exercise. They wired them up. And guess what? They found that there was the same activity in their motor cortex. This is the conclusion they came to. In other words, they discovered that imagination can actually alter the physical structure and function of our brains. Imagining creates new neural pathways in your brain which will make permanent changes in your life. Pretty cool, huh? Got to use this power. Now, I have a little experiment that we can do right now. Now, it didn't work quite so well in the first service. I don't know what I did, what I didn't do right. But we're going to do it again because I've done it before and it works well. But you have to participate with me for this to work. And if you let it work, it'll work and you'll be amazed. If you fight it, it won't work and you won't be amazed. So here you go. So in a minute, and it takes about 45 seconds. This is not hard, not rocket science. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, but before you do, I'm going to ask you to hold your hands out like this. Now, I want you, for those of you who've got them propped on the arms of your chair, if you're able to do it, unprop them. Really hold them up. Don't put them in your lap. Just hold your hands up, which is hard to do. Close your eyes. Now, feel your right hand, then feel your left hand. Just imagine that. And now, just imagine somebody walking by and placing a huge Webster's dictionary on your right hand. Feel that Webster's dictionary in your right hand. And next minute, somebody walks by and they stack 5 hymnals on top of that dictionary. Just feel those hymnals. And now somebody's going to walk by and they have these helium balloons. They're just floating in the air. And they tie one to your left wrist. Just feel them tie that balloon to your left wrist. And somebody else comes by and says, oh, I'm going to tie another one. Just feel that. Without moving your arms, open your eyes and look where your hands are. And see if there's a difference in the height of your hands. If your left hand is higher than your right hand. If the book hand is lower than the balloon hand. If you're really imagining it, it works. The Wright brothers used imagination. Every time they would do an experiment and something wouldn't work, one of them would say, it's all right, brother. I can see myself riding in that machine and it travels easily and steadily. They imagined flying until they brought flying into reality. So first, we must see it. Now, what can we imagine? Now, you as a congregation have an opening for a new senior minister, right? And so you're beginning to make space in your minds for your new minister. You're opening up the idea of loving a new minister and supporting a new minister and having them love you and how you're going to dedicate your energy to that new minister. And every time somebody comes as a guest speaker, you think, oh, I like that. Oh, I don't like that. And you refine that idea gets more and more crystal clear in the group consciousness of this congregation. And at the same time, there is a minister somewhere, some person somewhere who is opening their mind and their heart to serving a beautiful congregation. And I don't know how it's going to happen, but I trust in the power of imagination that the two of you will be divinely connected. That you will both refine your visions until those visions meld. And what will happen is that both of you will hold a higher vision, and together you will create something greater than either one of you could have done by yourself. I believe that's the truth. Sometimes, though, we only use our imagination to imagine what we don't want in our lives. Anybody claiming to know to be guilty about that? Wayne Dyer, in his book Wishes Fulfilled, said, highly functioning, self-actualized people. Aren't we all highly functioning, self-actualized people? It goes on to say, simply never imagine what it is they don't wish to have as their reality. Oh, like all powers, we can use them positively or negatively. Driving yesterday, my husband was driving us in the rain down I-95, and when he's driving, I don't have the brake. And I'd see that I can't see the trucks very far, or any cars very far ahead, and I'm getting like this inside. And I thought, here you're talking about don't use your imagination to terrorize yourself. And what are you doing? You're imagining having a wreck. So what did I do? I saw myself getting out of the car at my son's house, safe and sound. I took my picture off of all those cars racing around, cutting in front of us and all that rain, and I put it on arriving safe and sound. And what happened? We arrived there safe and sound. It's very easy to get caught up in negative imaginings. I don't know what your negative imagining is about. In October, late September, October, most years, we have the opportunity to imagine hurricanes. Do any of you ever get that opportunity? There are people on the news that are going to help us imagine those. There's a national weather station in Melbourne, and they start, if it's going to come to the East Coast at all, they start broadcasting from Melbourne. And we hear it over and over and over. And now, I really truly believe in being prepared. It is okay to go to the store and get a loaf of bread and whatever it is that you need to buy. But isn't it amazing how the whole grocery store is wiped out? For, the worst it's ever been in Melbourne was 2004 when we had 3 that came through. And I was without power for 3 weeks one time. But I never ran out of food. It's just amazing how we let our imagination and our fear I don't know what's going on in your life where you have some fear. But I'd like to invite you to consider the fact that when you get caught up in that fear, that you are terrorizing yourself. Nobody else is doing it. You are doing it yourself. So I'd invite you, when that's happening to you, take some deep breaths. There's an exercise that's called soft belly meditation. There's an exercise where you lay down and you let go of all tension in this area, in your lower belly. Just let go of all tension. So whatever's going on in your life where you are thinking the worst, let go of that. Replace that thought with something positive. See yourself coming out the other side. Another thing that I have experienced, and I experienced it through taking a class that we did this class at Melbourne. We did it one year. We did it so that 70% of our congregation had taken the class. It was a year that Unity was doing something called the Transformation Experience. And what happened out of that is we managed to let go of a building that we'd owned for 30 years that was 4,000 square feet and bought a 16,000 square foot building. But it was the work we did in here. And one of the things in this book, it's called the Q process, one of the things that it teaches us is that we can go back in the past and reimagine our past, have a new outcome. I know y'all are sitting there saying, wouldn't work, but it does work. And what happens is we have something that triggers us today, and we have something that we say to ourselves, and something derogatory that we will say to ourselves, because frankly, we frequently talk to ourselves worse than anybody else. And we have these things we say to ourselves, and we look back and we see, where did that come from? And then we reimagine the event. And we imagine it with usually there's somebody else involved. We imagine them having loving guides, a loving guide that helps them be their best self, and that we have a loving guide that helps us be our best self. I'm going to give you a silly little example of that, something that I worked on. This is true that I worked on it with this book. I had a teacher when I was maybe 8 years old that told me, it was pretty traumatic at the time. She told me to shut up because you can't sing. And I carried that with me. Just carried that with me. And as I did that work and I got back to that, remembering that event, which I had really, frankly, forgotten about. But as I did the work and I remembered it, I reimagined that she was not surrounded by 30 little 8-year-olds, that she had a better day that day, and that she put her hand on my shoulder and said, Beth, you need to learn to listen to the notes so you can match the notes. If you come by after class, I'll help you. And I could say, oh, you mean I'm supposed to be singing what they're playing? Different outcome. Now, I'm still not going to sing for you. But I healed that place inside. And while I still don't sing, there's another place in me that caused me to keep my voice very soft, very quiet, and not speaking up. That it caused me to shut up. And so by doing that work on that little incident, it made it easier to stand up here and talk to you without being like this. To be exposed, to be open. What we do with our imagination can change our lives. I have to skip a couple of stories. I do want to tell you one more true story about imagination. And you've played a part in this. You just didn't know it. You might not have been here at the time, but you've been a part of this over time. In 1978, the ministerial class that I graduated with made a class trip, and we came to this church as part of our tour. We toured churches in South Florida, on the southeast coast. And this church was by far the best church. The biggest, the best, the prettiest. And as we were leaving, I walked up here on this platform and stood here and said, one day I'm going to speak here. It's been 22 years. But holding that little vision eventually worked. Think about it if I had been holding that vision real constantly. I could have called Nancy and said, can I come guest speak? So I'm asking you this morning, are you willing, are you ready to use this power that you have, this power of imagination? Are you willing to use it to create a life of joy and happiness for yourself and for the world? Are you willing to let imagination open the gates of possibility? Are you willing to make space in your life for more possibility? Are you willing to commit to that right now?
Yes.
Will you commit to no longer using your amazing power of imagination to terrorize yourself? If yes, say amen.
Amen.
Will you commit to no longer using it to stay mesmerized by the current conditions you're in? If so, say amen like you mean it.
Amen.
And will you commit to using it to see the greater possibility in your life and in this church and in the life of all humanity? Amen. Imagination will make space for possibility in your life. That, my friends, is really the truth.